Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. Over the course of 2023, I have a year-long reading project. 10 contemporary classics I must redeem. This project was inspired by a triptych of videos created by Katie Books, in which he lists 10 classics you must read, the third video of which consists of books published in 2000 or later. Steve Donahue made a response video to all three videos of Katie Books' videos. And in his final one, his 10 contemporary classics you must read, I have experience with 4 of them. One of which you will see first thing in the part 16 of my 2023 library tour. I absolutely agree with him on. There, I was a little too dark. I absolutely agree with him on, and I'll talk a bit about that on Monday. But 3 of them I have bailed on. And so that inspired me to do 10 contemporary classics I must redeem. Those 3, as well as 7 other contemporary novels that I think are classics candidates. So that was part of my. So one of these 10 books I had on my agenda for February, and my choice was informed by February Fantasy Stories, FFS, which is a booktube event created by the Bookish Bryants, in which participants read fantasy in the month of February. The Bookish Bryants, for a number of reasons, have passed hosting duties for February Fantasy Stories to Steve Donahue, and I decided to participate, even though my reading relationship with fantasy is sadly troubled at the moment. So I picked 2 fantasies for my 12 TBR, as well as the 1 fantasy from my 10 contemporary classics I must redeem, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I was 0-1 on the 10 contemporary classics I must redeem, meaning Bell Redemption rejection, and 0-2 for February Fantasy Stories. So it's 0-2 and 0-3. This is a Bell Redemption rejection. So Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell is a historical fantasy set in early 19th century England. Centuries earlier, a magician conquered the north of England and ruled it as an independent kingdom for a number of decades or a century or so. And eventually, the north of England was reunited with the rest of England, and I'm guessing most of British history basically went along as it does in our world, except for magic is real and that certain numbers of gentlemen scholars study magic, although only one actively practices, Mr. Norrell of the title. He eventually gets an apprentice and eventually a second practicing magician, Jonathan Strange. So the novel is written in a pastiche of Victorian fiction, and it's not a loving pastiche, I argue. I hated it. I absolutely hated the length that just I immediately started reading. When I started reading it, I immediately hated it. It's bad. Just, yeah, I did not make it far. It immediately, the tone, the style, the characters, just everything immediately enraged me. Just, yeah. So anyway, I mean, I've long wanted to have another go at Jonathan Strange. This is pretty much my reaction the first time I read it. So I think I will be rather comfortable sending Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell on its way whenever I get around to it. Although it will show up again and with probably a condensed rand uh, next week in my library tour. Anyway, but before I got to Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, I finished A Distant Mirror by Barbara W. Tuchman. This is a history of the 14th century, primarily France, although other parts of Europe, particularly England, do feature quite heavily. Tuchman uses a French nobleman, Enguerrand de Coucy VII, as a focus. And she basically explores as many aspects of 14th century history as she can. And the greatest thing I could say about this book is that Tuchman has me wanting to read more about the period. The 14th century, calamitous though it was, is also very, very fascinating. But I can't say I'm particularly enamored of her style. Her writing style, the narrative, is a little dated, or more than a little dated, I think. And also, her, like, she has a perspective that didn't quite sit well with me through much of the book. And there's just something a little off about some of the history. And I don't quite know why. I mean, I'm not an expert in the period. I haven't really read much in the 14th century, but there's just something doesn't seem right. And I don't quite know what it is. But on the whole, I did really enjoy the book. So, yeah. So quite happy I finally read it. And I might reread it again at some point, particularly as I study more of the 14th century. And I also read another work of history. This one, and before I forget, And A Distant Mirror was the February pick for Steve Donahue's book club. Yeah, random bit of paper. Anyway, so I then went and read another work of history later in the week. This one is for Historathon. It's a year-long reading project in which participants read history. Historathon is separated into rough periods. So I read The Scythian Empire by Christopher I. Beckwith. This is a new release. It came out last month, and it's it's a reappraisal of the Scythians. The Beckwith argues that the Scythians, a nomadic Central Eurasian people who occupied a large swath of Central Eurasia, the Near East, were an empire. And that this empire stretched initially from Iran, like what is now Iran, to far western China. And he argues that the essentially that the Scythians were incorporated into, or that basically the Scythians, as they occupied what is now Iran, intermarried with local notables, and that one of these um, Scytho-Medes, Cyaxares, no, Cyaxares, I'm going to butcher his name, basically launched an internal coup and basically became the Great King. So the Scythian Empire became the Scytho-Mede Empire, and then a few generations later, when Cyrus the Great rebelled against the Medes, it then became the Scytho-Mede Persian Empire. I mean, the traditional form is that the Medes overthrew the Scythians, and then in coalition with Babylon, destroyed the Assyrian kingdom. And then a few generations later, Cyrus rebelled against the Medes and founded the Persian Empire. Beckwith's argument is that this is one contiguous empire with one contiguous royal line, just internal coups leading to basically new branches of the family ruling. Beckwith also argues that the westernmost Chinese states during the Warring States period, a few centuries later, Chao and Qin, that their reigning dynasties were, or reigning dynasties since it was the same family, were themselves Scythian or Scytho-Chinese, and that one of the members of this family would eventually become Qin Shi Huangdi, who unified China to become the first emperor in the Qin dynasty. And Beckwith uses linguistics. He argues that, at least in the east of the Persian Empire, that the lingua franca was likely what he calls Imperial Scythian, and that there are certain loan words, or there appear to be certain loan words in Chinese that would indicate something similar-ish on their end. The linguistic evidence goes over my head. I don't really understand it. I think he's probably on safer ground with the Persians than he is maybe with the Chinese, because it's, but I don't know. It's interesting. It's also interesting, I think, for the brief insights he gives to the Scythians as a people. However, there are a few issues with the book. It is very repetitive, exhaustively repetitive. He constantly repeats this line of aria, aria, haria to kind of reinforce his idea of like this one royal lineage that knit the Scythians, the Medes, the Persians together, and then the Chinese. And there are many, many other examples of this sort of repetition. Even pages later, it's needed some editing, I think. And he ends the book with an argument that, or with the question that, was it necessarily Scythian influence that caused the so-called axial age? I'm not an expert in the period. I'm not really as well read in the period as I would like. So I don't quite know if maybe he something, or if he's just overstating the case, because I do think there's a clear indication of boosterism, of where he's sort of hyping the Scythians at the expense of many other peoples. So yeah, and then there's this weird thing with the monotheism that I don't quite understand. But anyway, then again, that could probably be an indication that I just have a soft spot for polytheism. Anyway, so that was the Scythian Empire. Now, I did manage to have enough time to read one more book. So I was initially going to read some manga, and I kind of regret that I didn't. But I think if I have time towards the end of February, I will get to manga. But what I decided to do was read one of the poetry collections I will be hauling later this month. And that is The River Twice by Kathleen Graeber. This is a poetry collection from the Princeton series of contemporary poets. It's a middling collection. I think there are 3 or 4, maybe 5 really good poems in here, and the rest didn't really attract my attention all that much. So, yeah. Now, what will I be reading this coming reading week? So, over the weekend, I'm planning on getting to a book that I will also be hauling this coming February book haul, and that is God's Immortals by Sarah Iles Johnston. This is a Greek work of Greek mythology and modern retellings. I've dipped into it, and I really like what I've read so far, so I'm really looking forward to reading this over the weekend. And over the course of the work week, I will be reading The Trees by Percival Everett. This is one of the books I have on my 12 TBR, which is a year-long reading project, although I'm truncating it to 6 months or less, in which I read 12 works of fiction, 6 literary fiction, 6 fantasy. So I will get to 3 this month for sure. Although, since I'm going to be only getting to 1 in March, this will kind of count for March too. So anyway, so I'm looking forward to getting to this. I've heard a lot of great things about this book. I've wanted to read Percival Everett for ages, so quite happy to get to it. I had hoped to get to The Trees this month, and very happy that I am. And if there are any bails, I'll figure something out to read, and I'll report back next Friday. So, what else has been going on? I've been working on my library tour, which has been exhausting, as library tours are. I'm going to, probably at the end of it, have a wrap-up sort of reflection where I will ramble about what I'm going to do next with my collection. I already know I want to get at least another bookcase or 2 for the hall. And I don't quite know what's going to go there. And then probably this classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, drama wall will probably move back to science fiction. But I'll touch on that in a few weeks when I finish off my tour. Although it might be a while, so I might not be able to wait that long, but I'll see. I also went to my brother's on Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day with my mom, and we had fun. The kids were delightful, the 4 children of the apocalypse, my 2 nieces and 2 nephews, and the new baby, which I haven't quite figured out what I want to do with 5. So I need to figure that out. I guess once I know more of the new baby's personality, how I can kind of work that in. But anyway, BookTube, that's all I got for this week. I will be back next week with the library tour, maybe some more discussion videos, some tag videos. And until then, thank you. Have a great evening and weekend. And until I see you on Monday, stay safe.